Thank you for the opportunity to come before you. My name is Mark Lemoine. My prior life, I had a 24-year career in government affairs where I served as a staff member in the Michigan Senate, as well as a professional advocate. 4 years ago, my wife and I did what many people do in their midlife. We sold everything we own and decided to pursue the entrepreneurial dream of being in business for ourselves. Together, we're the owners and managing partners of Fifth Level Hospitality, which does business as the Lemoine of St. Joseph KOA Holiday, which is located in the Benton Harbor, St. Joseph, Michigan area. We're franchisees of Campground of America, which is the largest network of independently owned and operated campgrounds in the world, with 19 locations here in Michigan and over 525 locations across North America, the United States, and Canada. I'm a board member of the Michigan Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds, and I'm also the board chairman of the Southwest Michigan Regional Chamber of Commerce. Before I talk a little about how the current environment has affected our business, I thought it might be helpful to give a little profile of camping as well as RV parks and campgrounds. According to the 2019 North American Camping Report, it's estimated that 78.8 million American households engage in a camping trip at least once a year. The data shows that 54% of campers travel less than 100 miles from home to camp, or about an hour and a half's drive. That rises to 80% when we look at a 200-mile radius. So primarily, camping is a local activity. Estimates also show that there's 1 million Americans who live full-time in their recreational vehicle. Think of them as modern-day nomads, where they don't have a physical home themselves. This includes baby boomer retirees, snowbirds who live in the southern states during the winter and then come back north during the summertime, campground work campers, traveling nurses, and contract employees serving numerous industries. On May 11th of this year, a special report was issued of the North American Camping Report regarding the effects on COVID-19, and it revealed that more than half of campers ranked camping as the safest form of travel. This figure raises to 72% amongst baby boomers. The data also shows that 1/3 of leisure travelers who have never camped before are now interested in camping for 3 reasons. First, they want to spend more time outdoors after staying home for so long. They view it, secondly, as an affordable way to travel, and thirdly, they see it as an easier way to social distance in comparison to other forms of travel. Campgrounds and RV parks, which make up the outdoor hospitality industry, are more akin to hotels and motels and are not purely recreational destinations. We are inherently safer because the majority of our guests bring their own rooms with them in the form of a tent or an RV. We are outdoors on large tracts of land. We provide year-round accommodations for guests who live full-time at one location. We host seasonal guests who enjoy their recreational vehicle like a cabin or a second residence. We host guests from further locations who, including interstate and international travel. And we welcome leisure guests who are simply looking for a way to enjoy the outdoors with their family and friends. As an example, in 2019, my campground, which is located literally just about half an hour north of the Indiana border in Southwest Michigan, we hosted over 13,300 guests from all 50 states and 15 international countries, staying on average 3.2 days. In addition to providing accommodations, most private campgrounds also offer federally designated essential services of groceries, takeout food, laundromats, and we sell propane. In the wake of the national emergency, privately owned RV parks and campgrounds across the nation rose to the occasion to provide accommodations to those in need, while government-run facilities, state parks, and federal campgrounds locked their gates due to fear, lack of staffing, or preparation of their critical infrastructure. The outdoor hospitality industry took immediate responsibility to develop specific social distancing guidelines that promote the health and wellness of our staff and our guests. These CDC-compliant measures have now been implemented across the nation. In fact, up until yesterday, according to the Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds National, RV parks and campgrounds have been more fully opened across the country in 48 states except for 2. It was Michigan and Delaware. While hotels and motels here in Michigan were allowed to operate and had anybody that could come in, campgrounds, RV parks and campgrounds were limited to serve only critical infrastructure workers and otherwise needy individuals. The biggest restriction experienced in our industry wasn't even in the orders itself, but it was in the FAQ documents, which prohibited recreational camping for non-COVID related purposes. This created a burden that appeared to require RV parks and campground businesses to discriminate amongst its guests and impose an expectation that we be the judge to validate a guest's purpose for leaving their home and coming to us. This has caused significant confusion within our industry, local health officials, law enforcement agencies, and of course the general public. It also creates economic hardship for private campgrounds who are experiencing either partial or complete loss of revenue, specifically seasonal campgrounds, which receive upwards of 80 to 85% of their annual income between the Memorial Day and Labor Day holiday weekends. Since the start of the pandemic, we have been fully engaged, working collaboratively and patiently, providing information directly to Governor Whitmer's office and other key entities, including the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, and I personally served on the Outdoor Hospitality Work Group, which was created by Governor Whitmer and prepared and submitted recommendations to her on May 22nd, nearly 2 weeks ago. The science overwhelmingly shows that outdoor activity is healthy for individuals both physically and mentally. Our guests and the general public have adopted new norms of personal behavior that embrace social distancing even without being required. Over the past 2 months, the public policy environment in Michigan offered vague language, contradictions, and a lack of clarity in the timeline. Specifically for our industry, the My Safe Start Plan Phase 3 allowed outdoor work with additional measures and guidelines, but only for select businesses that were chosen by the governor. Those included landscapers, garden centers, golf courses, and marinas. Executive Order 2020-96, Section 11E, defined resumed activities including workers who perform work that is traditionally and primarily performed outdoors, including places of outdoor recreation. The first exception of all of the stay-home orders allowed individuals to leave their homes and travel as necessary to, quote, engage in outdoor recreational activity consistent with remaining 6 feet away from anyone outside your household. The Outdoor Recreation Work Group provided recommendations that showed this sector can operate safely. And other places of public accommodation, as I mentioned, the hotels and motels had been allowed to always receive guests, and other outdoor recreational businesses such as the golf courses and marinas had been opened weeks ago. Despite all of that, the FAQ document up until yesterday prohibited recreational camping, and the personal comments made by the governor during press conferences only added to the confusion when she made statements that it was her expectation that campgrounds be closed. While we recognize the burden of leadership carried by the governor and the limited role currently given to the legislature, according to the CDC guidelines for parks and recreational facilities, healthy swimming, and playgrounds, the science shows that with measures in place, recreational camping presents a low public health risk. We had a track record of working collaboratively with the administration. We had demonstrated our ability to enact independent, responsible, smart steps as an industry that promote the health and wellness of our staff and guests. Even with Executive Order 2020-110, Michigan now stands as an outlier from most of the nation. While I'm glad my industry is going to be able to operate a little more fully, my heart goes out to the thousands of individuals who have been impacted by unemployment, who are struggling with mental health issues due to the recent events, and the small business owners who are still prevented from from earning a living, providing for their families, engaging more fully in their communities, and doing their part to contribute to the fiscal challenges of both our state and our nation. We need to stop the bleeding of this economic massacre and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Thank you for listening to the small businesses, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And where did you say your business is?
I am located in Benton Harbor, down here.
Okay.
Senator Lasada's district.
Okay. Yeah, so what was your experience being that close to the border? Do you know when did Indiana start allowing camping, and what impact did that have on your business?
most of the country began to open up campgrounds within the last couple weeks. Personally, my campground, we have never been closed. In fact, right after the president declared the national emergency, as a good corporate citizen, and with the fact that it was very mild this winter, my colleagues within KOA in the southern part of the country told us that the Canadians were making a mass exodus out of the country, of course, to get across the border before it was closed, and snowbirds were beginning to leave as well in large droves about 4 to 6 weeks earlier than they otherwise would. This was, early to mid-March when pretty much 0 campgrounds are open in the state of Michigan. So I immediately opened up my 16 of my pull-through lots just to be available for those travelers. And between the middle of March and middle of April, when I would normally be closed, we had about 30 individuals who were in exactly that boat. They were traveling north. We had families that stayed as little as just one night. We had other families that drove 3 days from California to get back to Michigan. Their home wasn't available yet to them up in northern Michigan, so they stayed with us for 9 days. I had no services other than the site itself. Come April, again with the charge of the federal government telling us if you're a grocery store, if you're a laundromat, if you have takeout food or the propane, you should do everything you can to be open so that that critical infrastructure is still available to the general public. So I continued to operate. As I helped navigate these waters with many of my counterparts now, many of them, though, acted more out of fear, I believe, and it became quite uncomfortable. I was looking at the order, perhaps given my background, I was interpreting it, and I was operating my business to the fullest extent. But it made it quite uncomfortable because any presence or any activity in my park made it look like I was openly defying the governor, which of course I wasn't, nor wanted to be perceived as being.
Representative O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. Well, first of all, because I have a lot of campgrounds in my district, can you help clarify something for me because things are confusing? Are campgrounds open now across the state?
As of yesterday, we are now allowed to be more fully open. If you have a pool, the only restriction is that that's not open until June 8th.
Thank you.
We, of course, need to have some social distancing guidelines in effect with them. And as you'll see in the materials that have been presented, those guidelines have been put into effect all over the country and certainly here in Michigan as well.
Okay, thank you. And I do appreciate that clarification. It appeared, because I was getting calls all the time from campgrounds, can I open, can I open? Do you, again, we hear about the data and whatnot. Do you know why campgrounds were held closed as long as they were? Were you, as an organization, an association, did you know? Because again, I think you're outside, social distancing. When I've camped, we're not shoulder to shoulder by any means.
Correct. Quite frankly, I think it was just a lack of understanding of what our industry represented. At the start of all of this, when the governor issued the first stay-at-home order, I think many of us in the general public had disdain for these wild parties that we saw in beaches in Florida, and the thought was that those parties would just be conducted in the woods at campgrounds. That's not what the camping industry is, or the outdoor hospitality industry is. The confusion that was created, Representative, in my community at the local level, I immediately talked to my local health department, I talked to the sheriff, I talked to the prosecutor, making sure they understood this is how I'm interpreting it, this is what I'm doing. We were all on the same page. In other counties, however, local health departments were interpreting it quite differently. And many of my colleagues, they, again, not having my background, they were asking their local officials for permission. And the default, just to be safe, always fell on no. So we had this patchwork of enforcement or interpretation across the country, across the state, which fortunately now has been lifted as of yesterday.
Last quick question. Were you part of the hospitality work group, the outdoor, and if so, what were your thoughts on the process?
I was on it on behalf of the Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds. It was a very large group. There were probably about 100 members. It was predominantly, I would say, largely filled by individuals that represented municipal parks or state parks or federal campgrounds, which operate very differently than a private business. We as the previous speakers had testified, it was a 4-day, very rapid process. I probably contributed about 15 hours of my life that I'll never get back. But it was a good exercise. At times, I think I started with a little bit of frustration in that campgrounds were already beginning to open up across the country. And it started with almost the premise that, I as a private business owner was doing nothing for the last 2 weeks, or 2 months, but watching Netflix at home waiting for instructions from my governor. That's not the case. The industry had figured it out, and we were ready and had already implemented these plans. So I almost found it unnecessary to parse out what the industry had put together so I could give information to the state of Michigan to then give back to me to tell me what I'm doing or what I'm supposed to do. But I certainly appreciate the fact that the governor needed guidelines. I was grateful that the final outcome, at least for my industry, recognized the industry standards that were developed on their own, and none of the recommendations went beyond that. But I had not heard anything official on or whether or not that contributed to the governor's decision yesterday.
Senator Lasada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, thanks for being here. Can you, being that you're on your local Chamber of Commerce board, can you maybe tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your community?
Sure, and your district specifically, Senator, I know you appreciate that as well. For those of you who aren't familiar with Southwest Michigan, we're really a microcosm of the state's economy. We have world-class manufacturers with Whirlpool. We have several agribusinesses growing the freshest of fruits, as well as a number of nationally award-winning vineyards. Personally, I have 4 of them within a 5-mile radius of my property. And then, of course, tourism. Being right on the border, we are the playground of a number of individuals, largely from the Chicagoland area, and even northern Indiana and northwest Ohio. We have seen, as we look at the data, we have seen probably a bigger hit in the world of in tourism in terms of the unemployment in comparison to the state. As I look at the Connexus Group, which is a local organization that tracks this data, 18.2% of our unemployment figures in our area were related to tourism, compared to only 13% across the state of Michigan. We've also begun to see, as was previously mentioned, money pouring out of the state of Michigan across the border into Indiana, whether it be haircuts. I've already received some cancellations for this weekend. It's supposed to be 80 degrees. My pool is closed. People are going camping in Indiana, where the campground is open. So the money is leaving the state as opposed to being spent here, where it can be safely, where work can be safely performed.
So just to follow up, you said your pool is closed?
My pool is currently closed until June 8th, according to the governor's order yesterday.
Okay, and between now and June 8th, what are you going to be taught how to, or what's the purpose of that?
I don't know. My pool was ready to go on May 22, Memorial Day weekend.
What kind of pool do you have? Is it?
It's a relatively large pool, about 30,000 gallons, in-ground heated pool.
Is it saltwater? Is it?
It's chlorine.
Chlorine like bleach?
Correct.
What?
Yep.
Don't drink, but that will kill.
According to the CDC, there is, and the information's in your packet. According to the CDC, there is no evidence that COVID can be spread either in a pool, hot tub, or in a water park. The concern that has been expressed regarding pools is relative to the number of people that can be on the deck. My pool is currently licensed for 106. I voluntarily thought, what could I do? Perhaps I could just limit the number of people to perhaps 53, which is 50%, and that is indeed one of the recommendations that is now in the governor's order. I don't know what is expected to occur between now and Monday, but my pool's ready to go now, and people would love to enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Callie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when this question would come up at press conferences, and it was frequently asked about campgrounds, we repeatedly heard the governor say she was concerned with shared facilities. Was it ever part of the work group's suggestion that you open without shared facilities? So maybe rustic camping has to wait, but help me understand, were you proposing phases at all?
Sure. And I think, what happened both from the governor, perhaps personally, as well as individuals engaged in the work group is they were looking at it largely from the state parks perspective. Keep in mind, I'm a private business, and the state government is one of my largest competitors. You have the most beautiful tracts of land, but we have resources and facilities and amenities that most of the state parks do not. One of those resources that we have are staff. I have 17 individuals that service my park of 130 sites on a 40-acre property. We have no problem maintaining our bathrooms, for example, in contrast to perhaps the staff's capability at a state park who are either doing a rustic where it's just an outhouse or it's a restroom that they don't clean as many times as what we do as a private business. That was really the dialogue. I was unwilling to concede the fact that I could not maintain my restrooms prior to COVID-19. Restrooms are the number one thing that guests want to see, that it's clean, that it's sanitary. In a COVID-19 environment, we continue to clean it meticulously to our own high standards and then have added other disinfection cycles within that process as well. In terms of the shared spaces, my clubhouse is closed because that is an indoor space. My general store, which is a retail setting, is simply limited to 6 people, which is the percentage relative to the fire marshal code. But other than that, everything else that we do is outside. And our guests, as I had shared, are bringing, whether it's their tent or their RV, they're bringing their room with them, which largely is significantly safer than it would be for me to go to a hotel like I did last night here in this city.
Thank you very much. And one comment that I received a lot from my constituents was the fact that they rent an annual spot. They drive their camper or their RV up to one location. They leave it there for the summer. And while other Michiganders were allowed to travel to their second stick-built residence, correct, a number of Michiganders were not allowed to because that summer home, if you will, is a camper or an RV. How much of your population is an annual customer versus maybe a weekend?
Sure. For my campground specifically, we do tailor more to the leisure traveler. I do have a small handful of seasonal guests. I also have work campers who live on property. That was a definite point of confusion for a lot of campgrounds. When the governor allowed individuals to travel to their homes, by inference, seasonal campers were viewed as okay. But again, one county might have interpreted it one way, another county might have interpreted another, and campground owners being confused oftentimes defaulted to no, either independently on their own, telling their guests that they can't come in, or they did it with a level of intrepidation, believing that they might be getting into trouble, which nobody wanted to do. The guests that you speak of are those seasonal guests. where they literally bring their trailer there, they set it there, and they utilize it like a cabin or a second residence. The two that I have are from Chicago. They work in the Chicago area, and they come up to Michigan's Great Southwest every weekend just to enjoy our area. Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions, so thank you, Mark, for being here. We appreciate it.
Chairman, appreciate it.